It's the day after we
Have we started?
interview. We have started.
Oh, okay.
Did it not come up in the little box for you?
Oh yeah, I wasn't looking there. I was looking out the window.
Good.
I'm fully present. I'm not wearing my pajamas in any way. I'm completely, fully engaged. Good morning. I'm ready for action.
Ready. I am more bunged up. I thought I sounded bunged up yesterday, but I'm more bunged up today with hay fever, and it's absolutely kicking my butt this year. But we've got a recording, haven't we? Because we interviewed yesterday John Cree.
John Cree.
Who I don't think I can give a long enough introduction to. I said in the podcast that John was peppered throughout every bit of forest school literature I could find. John was one of the people who helped start the Forest School Association. John was recently made the first Forest School ambassador, which means that he has been voted as one of the, I can't remember the word, but it's like outstanding contribution. It's like an OBE for Forest School. And John is the first and so far only person to have that. So we got to sit down with John for a bit over an hour and have a chat because John has a specialism in kind of challenging behaviour and grief and trauma. And we thought with everything that's going on and people going back to schools, that's probably a pertinent thing for us all to know about.
Yeah, it's a very corona-related podcast, isn't it? Well, a lot of it is. But he's also really interesting and has had lots of interesting experiences, like going to the Kalahari Desert and being with the community there, which was fascinating. It was really good.
And I think even after this has all gone, this will be a useful resource for anybody who has children who might be experiencing grief or trauma. It's not necessarily just corona related. The same things can apply to any kind of grief and trauma. John did say that he wished he'd put a couple of exercises in. So there's links in the podcast description. If you want to find out more, head to any of those links and get in touch with John. And he's got lots of training courses on. And he's just an excellent person to kind of learn more from.
Yes.
Okay. Enjoy.
You're listening to the Forest School Podcast with Lewis Ames and Gemma Southerden.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello. Keen. Normally people sit there very quietly and they're like, "Oh,
do they? I thought. Well, let's start. It's Lewis. I've got to be up and about. Jude said, "I like Lewis. He's really enthusiastic." Because of all that video stuff. She saw you a few times.
Antonia keeps, when I showed my wife this, so John and I have been doing some videos for the FSA, and originally we were trying to condense them down to like a minute, and there was somebody else that showed me a video and he was talking really slowly, and so I sped it up by I made it like 103% just to try and speed him up. It wasn't John, it was somebody else. And
just to get him to talk at the same rate that you talk.
Well, and then I showed Antonia my video and she went, "I don't think it works when you speed them up." I was like, no, that's just mine's. Oh, okay. And I tried to make it the right speed, and I would a bit like the. Sorry, we got John Cree. John Cree is here. John, for people who don't know your background, do you want to give us a couple of minutes of sort of how you came to Forest School and where you are now?
Yeah, okay. I blame it all on my mum, because mum got us into this from when we were crawling, really, in the Chiltern Hills, Bluebell Woods, and me and my brother would play a lot. We went out fishing, did all that sort of stuff. But mum was the one that had the poetry and that sort of nature connection stuff. So it all stemmed from there. So I've been lucky, really, having had that. And then I, during school years, sort of as a geography teacher, got me into this, and then he got me into Friends of the Earth and all of that. And we lived in Nottingham at the time, and I wanted to clear up the mining fields, and I was good at maths, so I wanted to be a mining engineer. But then my girlfriend at the time, And this was probably one of the big game changers for me. She said, "God damn, it's stupid. You're into flowers. You don't want to go into mining engineering and all that." I said, "Well, yeah, but I'm good at maths. I hate the tips and the damage the mining industry. And the only way to change it is from the inside. So I'm going to go and do mining engineering." And just Cindy stuck to her gun and said, "No, I don't think you should. I think you need to do something with flowers." So I ended up doing an ecology degree and then a master's in conservation, worked for Nature Conservancy Council and worked for a wildlife trust, and started getting into working with kids. We just took kids out on nature reserves. We're doing nature reserve management, really. I thought, oh, actually, I enjoy this. This was I always like being around kids, but then doing it more formally, just taking them out on a couple of nature reserves, and we started working a bit in school grounds. So I went and did. That's after I've done my masters in conservation, and then went to school and hated it. Absolutely hated it. I did teacher training for a year and didn't do my you had to do teaching practice in those ways. You still do, and I just didn't do it. I just couldn't stand the whole.
One of us.
Yeah.
And people just did a nice little, box type hand movement. Is that what that was, John? It's sort of like a, squashing things in boxes.
Squashing things in boxes. That was it. Yeah, and I felt like I was in a box. And I would try and get out whenever I could, but it was just, it wasn't me. The best thing about it, I remember the one lesson I really enjoyed was a chemistry lesson, because this was in secondary school. And we blew up the classroom more or less. So
excellent.
And I was in a fairly good secondary school. This was not in my teaching practice, but during the teacher training. This was in Sheffield, and they did have a little rural studies area, but they never really used it. It was the end of rural studies. That's probably before your time. Rural studies was big in the 1970s and 80s. It died off in the 80s, but in the 1970s and even at our school, we had a little rural studies area with goats and all the rest of it.
That sounds amazing.
I have heard.
There was some good stuff around in the 1960s and 70s, and they got rid of it, like woodwork. God, that was one of my favourite. And then it's all gone stupid. Woodwork now, it's not. It's resistant materials. What's that about? It's just woodwork's gone.
I still did woodwork. I did woodwork when I was at school in the 90s.
Right, yeah, in the 90s. But then the last, 10, 15 years, it's all changed. It's more or less gone.
People don't need to make stuff anymore, John. We just need to think about things and do computers.
Yeah, but then they don't realise the brain needs to make stuff, and it needs the hands to make the brain work. Anyway, that wouldn't go on my hobby horse now. Well, we will. That's all to do with trauma, that. We'll come to that. Anyway, are you recording this?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes.
This is me going on. Sorry, I just thought I'm going on too long now, aren't I? How did I come to Forest School? I ended up in a long. I worked in centres and I worked in youth work. That's what I sort of trained and was passionate about, youth work. Worked in centres and then moved to Bishop's Wood after working in the Peak National Park for about 20 years, coordinating education for the National Park for quite a big chunk of time. Well, it was 15 years, big chunk of time, but also moved into the training team, did a lot of work with trainers, and then saw Bishop's Wood being developed. And I was involved with Earth Ed at the time. So this is back in the early 80s. The Bishop's Wood Centre, for people that don't know, it was sort of run by Worcestershire, but it was one of the first green purpose-built centres in the country and got the REBA Green Building Award. And I went down and visited it because the new said, "Give us a job," basically, and he did. This was in year 2000. And it just so happened I got there when Worcestershire decided to take on Forest School. They got Gordon Woodall from Bridgewater to come up and do some in-service training at the centre on the behest of our early years advisor. She was amazing, just Sheila Sage. She was really into the whole gender thing, particularly looking at boys and how stereotypical things get at an early age. And she saw Forest School, and a group of people went down there, brought it back up. And I guess Worcestershire was one of the first, Worcestershire and Norfolk were the two first real local authorities that really embraced it. It's weird because Somerset, and that's where it all started, which is very strange. And so the Forest School coordinator was appointed more or less the same time I started there, running training and doing work with day visits and going out into schools and all the rest of it. So I just watched Forest School grow and then sort of trained in it, and the rest is history, really. So I was just lucky. I've never had a life plan, really. Just dropped into things. And during the Forest School stuff, I met Hoppy Wimbush, which is coming up to the topic of this. And Hoppy, she was in at the start of Forest School, really in Wales. A lot of stuff came out of Wales. When it came out of Bridgewater, then Wales really ran with it. And Hoppy was, she ran workshops, did a lot on emotional literacy and trauma, but particularly emotional literacy. And I remember Hoppy coming along to one of the national meetings when we were just thinking about setting up a national network, and it started under the IOL, and we launched a special interest group in the Institute for Outdoor Learning in Worcestershire. Quite a few hundred people came along, and Hoppy was there running a workshop in emotional intelligence, emotional literacy, and was sort of just clicked with her. So I got Hoppy to come along and run an emotional literacy workshop at Bishop's Wood with us, and I worked alongside it because I was a bit into all that stuff. And she said, "John, you need to go on the Masters with Margot Sunderland." I don't know whether you come across Margot Sunderland.
No.
So Margot's she used to run the Institute for Arts and Education and Therapy with the University of London. There's a separate thing in Islington. And she then eventually, she's now, she wrote What Every Parent Needs to Know. It should be on the reading list for everybody. That's one of the essential books. And she basically worked alongside Jaak Panksepp, who's the guy who discovered these 7 systems we've got in our limbic system, thinking of our emotional system, basically. And she's now runs the Institute for Childhood and Mental Health. So she's a bit of a big cheese. And I went along and I just loved her books and stuff, which Hoppy put me on. And I went along to enroll for the emotional literacy course. It was a whole weekend sort of interviewing and workshops before you could get in on this. And I loved the place. It had a really good feel. There was only 2, and it didn't happen that year. And after that, the Institute sort of started not running stuff. And then she moved to be the director of the Institute for Childhood Mental Health. But ever since then, really got a passion for it, and done lots of sort of inset courses. And through the youth work stuff and the work that we did at Bishop's Wood on the alternative curriculum and with pupil referral units, basically running Forest School for teenagers, I just really delved into this in a bit more detail in terms of the challenges they face and some of the trauma that they've gone through and the reasons they are where they are. So it's sort of brought me, and just see Forest School as a really important approach, if you like, to working with particularly those that need that nurturing, that are challenged by all sorts of things. And I always hate the thing about challenging behaviour. It's like they're challenging. No, they're not. We challenge ourselves. And it's just our system and the backgrounds. And many of them have had adverse childhood experience, which is now a common term in all of this, that's caused the trauma. If you look at the young minds, I don't know whether people know about young minds, but they're the main progressive on the edge young mental health institution run by young people, really pushed by young people. And you look at all the statistics on there, and a lot of it is down to adverse childhood experiences earlier on, which is why we've got one of the highest teenage suicide rates in the world. And I just see that connection with nature and the holding that nature does so important, because it can be a challenging environment, and we can do all that woodsy stuff, but there's a lot of bodily stuff involved, which really helps trauma. Yeah. So that's a long story of my story.
Well, no, it's
Applications for Forest School training are now open at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
It struck me that when I was looking up, I did a quick kind of like, oh, what have people already asked John, and what haven't they asked John, so that we're not covering old ground. And I have to say, I struggled to find a book that didn't have you either thanked in it, or that you had written some sort of like a blurb or a foreword for, or contributed in some way. If you look through Forest School literature, your name is just peppered across all of it. So I would
really?
say...
Nobody's ever said that to me before.
It is absolutely everywhere.
God.
But I would say my first experience of seeing your name pop up was, I think it was courses you were doing with Lily about challenging behaviour.
Yeah.
And so that's what we wanted to sort of talk about, is we're aware that when, so we got the lovely announcement yesterday that schools are definitely going to be open tomorrow, for better or worse, but that they will be going back. And it kind of struck us that lots of children will be going back with a degree of, grief and trauma sounds like a big, heavy word.
Yeah.
Because normally we associate those words with like death and, family bereavement and monumental experiences, but they can be words that are used to describe not having been out to go and play for a long time. And so it kind of seemed pertinent that if schools are reopening and people are running sessions again, that we should be prepared we should sort of expect that children are coming back with a higher level of stress and grief and trauma than they did before.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the things that I wanted to ask you was, so when we talk about planning our sessions, we quite often talk about kind of co-creation, and that as a leader, your mental state is as important in the mix as the children's. And so I wondered what your thoughts were on the fact that not only are all these children going to be coming back into education with grief and trauma, but we as leaders we're not arriving where we were in April when we closed. Do you know what I mean? We've got stuff going on as well.
Yeah. And I think that can be our strength, which is where our vulnerability comes in. I've sort of, over the last few years, having seen that Brené Brown TED Talk, quite a few years ago now, the most hit TED Talk of its time. I don't know whether it still is. I mean, it's a few years since I've seen it, but her TED Talk on vulnerability really struck a chord with me in terms of this grief and all the rest of it. As you say, it doesn't have to be a big thing. And in these times of lockdown, it is often related to a loss of something, and for many kids it's the loss of their contact with their peers and their kids and their own friends, to be able to go out and play, and suddenly you're by yourself. And it's very different playing with them on the screen, because a lot of them have been playing with each other on the screen, obviously, but it's just that physical thing that's so important. We are physical beings, and there's been loads of research done on the impacts of the screen on all of this. And if you get engrossed in the screen, I had one lad a few years ago I was working with, he was 11, he was on the screen literally 24/7. His habit was fed by his caregiver, and she fed him, she brought his meals to his bedroom, and he'd carry on gaming. He just gamed, and no school could deal with him. And it was just, it was just such a crying shame. He was brought to us, and he was hunched like this. And me and another leader with me, Steve, who worked with these sort of more specialist group, walked around the site with him, and he very rarely lifted his shoulder But at the end of it, his mum was with us and turned to him and said, so do you want to come? And he just looked at her and gently nodded. He said, right, he's coming. I just thought, oh, well, that wasn't the usually enthusiastic response that we normally get. And it took us 7 months before he'd lift his shoulders, and he could hardly move. And that's the extreme end of the screen thing. But actually, he really did, underneath it all, need contact. He needed contact with other people. And we had another lad who was working with him from the local, because he was going to be moved into the local special school, which used to be a pupil referral unit. They took this other lad who was in fights about 20 times a day. He was being physically restrained every day, all the rest of it. They just thought it would be good for him to come along and actually see how he interacted with him. And actually it worked. It's really good. And it was partly because we found his passion was animals. And suddenly he would really, and he was into reptiles and newts in a big way. So if he ever started kicking off, and then we had a little newt refuge nearby, which he did see, that he saw newts, but he also saw a grass snake that was a mother who was under these, the corrugated iron things. And it was just interesting just watching these two interact, and you just knew that the fighting and everything was about needing that contact from that one end, and the other lad who was just on the screen 24/7 desperately needed it. He didn't know because he was addicted to the screen completely. But you could just see him suddenly coming out of it and suddenly realizing he loved running around. He could hardly run, hardly walk. But the other guy, he really liked the sort of running games and stuff. I often wonder what happened to them both, because I was with them for 2 years, 3 days a week. This was, highly intensive stuff. But it was well worth it. You just see.
Support the podcast today by becoming a Patreon member at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
So do you think that's something that we need to have in our heads when we do start, whenever people start their groups up again, that we should, I don't want to use the phrase have lowered the bar, because that sounds like but almost to anticipate that social skills will have withered?
Yeah, I think definitely there'll be something, although kids are very resilient, and it depends what's happened at home, doesn't it? And it depends how they are with the parents and all the rest of it. But I would just give them space when they come and just let them rediscover what it's like to be with friends. It's going to be hard in these social distancing times, because they are going to want to get together and probably do some rough and tumble and all of that. And I know in our risk assessment that we're putting out from the FSA is you're going to have to try and avoid any physical contact games, but expect them wanting that physical contact. It's going to be tricky, because we need that physical contact. If you look at all the somatic therapy that goes on now, the first thing they say is we've gone the wrong way. We've seen physical contact as an abusive thing, and it can be abusive in extreme circumstances, but the appropriate physical contact is absolutely essential to keep that human connection and that soothing going. And just that, even just the gentle tap on the shoulder, or that, I mean, I've been doing this with friends recently. You all been doing that?
The elbow.
Yeah. And it does make a difference than just saying hello. You feel so awkward when you're standing 2 meters apart and saying hello, and we've just gone over and done that, and there's something happens between us.
There could be. I would be I wouldn't say advocate, but I'm definitely interested in the ideas of grounding, and all the electrons passing and going through and all this hippie nonsense that I can't quite find.
Well, it's not hippie nonsense anymore. Cambridge University, Oxford University, Stephen Booner, who works with lots of universities in North America, all the science, even quantum physicists are showing this electromagnetic field, this resonance that happens between living things is real. And people see it as hippy dippy because it was all, it's part of the indigenous and all of that. But actually, the physics is now bearing it out. And we have to shout about that to sort of say, look, actually, science is showing us now that there are these electromagnetic resonating fields between us, and particularly between our hearts and plants. I just love that science that's going on at the moment.
I have seen some forest school leaders suggest, or some maybe early years outdoor folk kind of talking about reopening and saying, oh, what we're doing is we're kind of designating each child a tree, or each child is choosing a tree, and that's going to be their tree to hug, to get that kind of physical contact from, when they aren't able to do that from us as adults and from children.
Yeah.
Well, you're feeling upset, go to your tree and give it a hug. I thought that was really interesting. I think they're even talking about like putting a face on it somehow, or like a scarf around it.
Yeah, whatever helps.
I have yet to see. I mean, and I feel like it's a forest school trope to see the mud face on a tree.
It is a trope, isn't it?
But I have yet to see one that in any way makes me feel comforted. They are all the scariest.
Exactly, they're all really scary, and I just think, whoa.
Yeah.
But having said that, there is something about them. There's a special needs school, a really good one in Worcestershire. And I remember there was one of their teachers, we were training in forest school, and we used to go out and assess them. And there's one lad he was wheelchair bound completely. So this is physical needs as well as emotional needs, this school. And it's a brilliant school. I will name it. It's Chasgrove School. They're well known. And they've got a little forest school area, and this lad who'd been in a wheelchair, and this particular leader, she raised the bar for everybody in that school. And while I was there, I was sat next to him, just chatting to him, and the rest, some of them were playing with clay, and I was making something out of clay. I think I was making a little probably making one of those evil goblins or something. And suddenly he looked over to me. And he started pushing. He didn't have much language on the chair, and I just said, "You want to get out?" And then my brain stopped working. I forgot the name. Came over. She lifted him out of the chair, put him on the floor. He scurried over to the tree. And he took my goblin and he just splattered it onto the tree. So they'd not done any of this stuff before. He just splattered it onto the tree and then started sticking stuff to it. And I looked up, and I wish I could remember her name. That's awful. I know her really well. She was in tears. I said, "What's up?" And she said, "John, we've lifted him out of his wheelchair before, and he's just sat on the floor, but he's never moved like that before and wanted to do that. What she just more or less said, what that have you done?" I was just, it's the goblin, yeah. But it wasn't a goblin, it was just that wanting to touch the tree, but the clay, maybe just molding the clay in his hand, because that's, we're made of clay. We do come from, we've got soil throughout us. When we eat any plants, we've got soil in it, and there's all that Celtic stuff that talks about clay.
Are you all right, John? Have you lost
the plot now? Yeah, lost the plot. Well, you go back to the Greek myths, Prometheus, Zeus, all of that.
Yeah.
Humans were moulded out of clay, which is a metaphor, obviously, but also there's a bit of reality in that, because we take in soil all the time, every time we eat, don't we? All that. Anyway, gone off on one again. It was something about the resistance of the tree, because we know that's what we actually know, that a lot of particularly, I mean, I've worked with really traumatized kids, and it is that proprioceptive, in technical terms, if you're a special needs person and into sensory processing difficulties, but all of us need that resistance. And we know now, particularly through all the science that's been done with somatic healing, the use of the body, is this resistance is really important. And as I've read more and been on various little trainings about this, that was what was going on for that little lad. He knew the tree. There's something about the tree. You could see it's resistant, but the clay at the same time. And just doing that, so I didn't need to do anything. It was just that invite, really, almost, to do that. So there is science around that, and I think it's just that combination of materials and that. And okay, some of them, yes, yeah, you can blame Chris Holland for all of that stuff. It's just, I put it in his I Love My Forest School years ago, and all these little free spirits. But there is something behind it.
John, can you give us any examples of any other examples of when you've used that kind of like resistance stuff with other children and groups? Things.
Oh, yeah, lots. I just, I mean, it can be anything. It can be tug of war. So sometimes I remember having one group, just really. We had two lads in it, and these were 13-year-olds. They were from special school, but it was emotional behaviour difficulties constantly. They were on the street. They were real edgy, and I'll never forget one lad who was. You could just see, oh my God, he's got a real edge to him, and then you just think, no, this is my edge responding to his edge, and that's, you have to sort of just step back and say, stop labelling, John. It's just. So halfway through the session, just before lunch, we decided to play tug of war because there was some real rough stuff. There was some aggressive language, some rough stuff between a den war that had gone a little bit over the top. Which is all about that is about that resistance thing, but more extreme because it's wrapped up with their thinking as well. So we played the tug of war, and suddenly he'd switched and wanted to play more of those types of games in the afternoon, but his whole demeanour had switched. There was something about that sort of where you're really putting a lot of effort in to that resistance that sort of soothes.
Definitely.
It helps you feel grounded, doesn't it? Just in terms of like, what is your body capable of? And for children, their bodies are capable of a different thing almost on a daily basis. And so it makes sense that you would want to, you know, drive your engine as fast as you can to see, you know, that's why children run and chase. It's all about what can my body do? And I think the difficulty is that in sort of before all of the COVID stuff happened, I would have put those activities in a group that I would have said forest school teachers love and head teachers hate to see, because they're big and they're physical and they look aggressive, but they're not. They're just big. They're big in terms of physicality.
And they're regulating as well. I mean, head teachers, some head teachers, or not just head teachers, anybody they need more training in this to know that actually these help regulate behaviour.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the often the opinion is that it encourages more aggressive behaviour. You're enabling it, you're sanctioning it, and you're making it look like, okay, this is a place where this is allowed, and therefore fights are going to break out the whole time. When you're absolutely right, it is about, you know, if you have the practice in that play, like animals, you know, when you see like little lion cubs and stuff tumbling around, you know, they're learning where their strength is and when to stop. It's as much when to stop as how it feels.
Absolutely. Yeah, and
like sensory needs as well, because that's another isn't it? It's like,
and I think every teacher, well, certainly every special needs teacher that needs to pass this on to everyone else, needs to read Waking the Tiger, because that's what Waking the Tiger is all about, which is Peter Levine's he's the guru in somatic stuff, and that's what that is about, because he looks a lot at animals and what animals do, and because we're animals too, and it is about waking the tiger within us, and the tiger regulates big time. And I think there needs to be a lot more awareness about the role of all this, and then we'd have a lot more forest school happening. They'd suddenly realise.
Do you think we're approaching though a point where we might be hitting almost from two fronts? This idea that what we need the most right now is this, in terms of helping us, you know, sometimes people say to help with depression and anxiety, exercise is the thing to do. And I feel like in a similar way, this sort of childhood grief and trauma, these kind of big exercises will be helpful. But we're also in a point where possibly the worst thing you could do right now in terms of scaremongering and the zeitgeist is to say, I'm going to encourage the children to do more touching and to share ropes and to push. And so the thing that is going to get us out of this hole is the thing that we're all the most scared of and that we can't be seen to be doing.
Yes, absolutely. And that can be traumatic for some. And I know trauma is a big word, isn't it? But it can be disturbing. Because we've got, on the one hand, we're really scared, about doing this because that's the message, and this is the virus, this sort of that's there. And on the other hand, we sort of know subconsciously we need it. And it was interesting. I went out to we've got a favourite little swimming spot here. I live in Worcestershire, and we're right on the River Team, which is a beautiful river that I paddle on a lot, and we go swimming in it a lot. And there's a really lovely swimming spot. So we're out because it's been hot this week. Out a couple of days ago, me and Jude, we went off for a walk, and there's quite a few people there and young people there. And it was just really interesting. There was a family, and I think it was probably 2 families before Boris made his announcement. Was it Boris or whatever? Somebody, Jude just said this morning, they announced yesterday we can get together with families, which I'd not realised. But I think a lot of them were doing it before then. When they were certainly down at this swimming spot. I just watched the kids. There was this group of kids. There was 2 younger ones and 3 older ones. And I think they were probably from the same family, but 2 separate families. It looked like 2 sisters got together. And there was one just sat with the mum. And we just overheard the conversation, and it was exactly what you were saying. Most of them were playing in the river, no social distancing, completely splashing each other and all the rest of it. And this other one was on the bank and saying, and his mum was saying, "Don't you want to go and play with the others in the river?" I said, no, I'm going to catch the disease.
Yeah.
So it was just a really good illustration of just what you're saying. We've got, on the one hand, we've got to protect ourselves, but on the other hand, we have got this natural urge. We want to make contact. How do we regulate that? How do we...
We were doing our risk assessment the other day, and we were talking about that, weren't we, Lewis, about... So the government advice at the moment does say, there's a sentence that says we understand and acknowledge that primary school age children and younger cannot be expected to follow social distancing. It then does a couple of sentences later, but all children and staff should be 2 meters apart where possible.
No.
How do you negotiate that? But we were kind of thinking about what that means for our groups and how to run sessions responsibly, and we kind of took that to mean, well, if younger children are going to naturally gravitate towards each other, we would not encourage that and set up activities that would invite them to become very close. However, we're going to have to expect that they are going to be doing that, and if they do, then we're not going to be shouting at them to step away from each other. But also, there are going to be some children who are naturally more aware of what's going on in the news and perhaps a bit more anxious and a bit older, who are going to be watching these younger children in the same group, in this mixed age group, and watching these younger children and feeling anxious that they are, together.
Coming together, yeah.
Talk with those older children, or those more aware children, those more anxious children, who are probably going to turn around to us and go, shouldn't we be stepping in? They're touching each other. Shouldn't we be doing something? And how we engage in that dialogue in a way that is, because you can't say, oh, don't worry about it, because...
No, of course not. Yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, you want to sort of acknowledge the fear. But I think what we've done is put so much fear in people that we haven't got a relationship with this virus. I was taught a lot, which probably has got bearing on just how we work with this. I went to Namibia in March. I don't know we had to come back early. It was like a severance because we were with the oldest indigenous group of people on the planet, still persistent hunting. Still not as nomadic as they used to be, through need, really, because they have to put food on the plate, and because all the animals have been sort of overhunted and all the rest of it. It's sort of interesting. But we were out in this bubble in the middle of the Kalahari Desert in Namibia, really humbled by these people, really funny, very bright, fully aware of the 21st century, but also their lineage going back tens of thousands of years. Right, their hunting has not changed. Their foraging has not changed, and but they are faced with a far bigger pandemic than this pandemic, which is TB. 50% of them have TB. 40% of that 50% is going to die, right? But they have this relationship with TB, which is very different from our relationship with coronavirus. completely different. It's just like they've embraced it. It's just a matter of life. It's part of their life, even though in terms of being in their community, it's only been in their community for, I think, maximum of 60 or 70 years, because it's been the European settlers, or maybe 100 years, who brought it over. But they've embraced it, and it's just like they've embraced anything that comes as part of their life and have a more positive attitude. It's just like they had a relationship with it that wasn't based on fear.
That's interesting.
It sounds almost like kind
really
of
interesting
Buddhist detachment of just, like when people do mindfulness and they say you just observe the thoughts coming by, and that.
Yeah, it's a bit like that, but it wasn't like Buddhist. It wasn't like a mindfulness thing. It was just part and parcel. Oh, that's the way, it's the way it is. It's sort of you have to get on with life.
Well, that kind of leads into one of the things that I wrote down that I really wanted to ask you was, and it ties into both grief and trauma and challenging behaviour, which is that fine line that we all have to tread between dealing with something and dwelling on something. And I wondered if you had any experiences on, how do we, like we say, those children who might be anxious when they see other children not social distancing, or they might be their behavior might be out of their control at certain points in a session, and how do we acknowledge those things and acknowledge anxiety and acknowledge grief and trauma, but without, because my feeling always with a lot of books that will sort of advise on parenting and teaching, and they'll say when a child is, or a learner is dysregulated, that's not the time to talk about it, which I completely agree with. And then they say when they're in a good place, that's the time when you have that conversation. And what I've always felt is that, well, that to me is like digging up an old wound, because now you're in a good place, and it's almost like going, let's just open that back up again. Let's dig into there, So how do we have those conversations about grief and trauma and anxiety?
I think it's really tricky, particularly as we're not trained therapists or counsellors, and we have to actually say we aren't therapists, we're not counsellors, we're not professionals. You don't want to start opening things up that are going to lead to re-traumatizing people at all. And I think sometimes it's just it's us as leaders being open to it and listening to them and watching them and thinking, oh, they're doing that, I might just go over and have a little chat. I'm not necessarily going to retry. I mean, it may be that, and it is about timing, and it's about the right space, the right time. And it's not about when you think, oh, they're all calm and everything, let's have a look at it now. It's not that at all. And sometimes that right space and right time never comes. Fine, just leave it. But there is something, and they may be, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that this is the joy of being out of Forest School. They may well actually be acting things out through just what they're doing, and they're expressing it not verbally, but physically anyway, in their play.
Yeah.
And that's why play is therapeutic. And it's coming out in some way, because we don't want it to block up. It's a bit like Rebecca. Did you go to the grief thing last week?
No, I missed that one.
The grief webinar. So there was one really powerful sentence that she was talking about. She said, depression is bottled up grief. That's what it is. It all goes back to bottled up grief. And we all know when you grieve and let it out, actually suddenly something releases. Candice Pert, she was a real game changer in terms of all of this. She was a neuroscientist, and she was a biochemist. And she wrote a book which was a bit of a game changer in the early 80s called The Molecules of Emotion. And it was her who really discovered that every molecule in our body has a receptor on it. They have receptors, grab onto other molecules and hormones and all the rest of it. And if they're grabbing onto stuff that's if you like, bad stuff, suddenly if it stays in the body, it gets blocked. And this is where the unblocking comes. And you have to unblock it some way. And often bodily motion is a good way of unblocking it. And we, Rumi had a lovely quote, communication, the best communication is without words. The words to that effect is without words. We don't need to verbalize this, because sometimes just doing something with the body can unblock it. And when you're outside and you've got this space and you've got this very subliminal, multisensory stuff coming in, you're suddenly feeling a bit freer. And just by playing out there and letting it out, you don't need to dwell on it verbally. You can just, and that's where I guess that's where a bit of training for us as leaders is good, just to notice that and think. And there may be some dialogue that's coming out. There might be gobbledygook, or it may be a scream or whatever. And that's their way of unblocking and letting go. And we don't need to dwell on it.
I really like that. So it's more about us kind of, as ever, facilitating rather than driving something.
And just noticing, I think.
Exactly.
And you might say afterwards, when they're doing all this, you might want to say, "Oh, God, that seemed really exciting." Or, I'm feeling a bit, how are you feeling at the moment then? What's that? She said, "Oh, actually, yeah, it was great doing that, digging that, throwing that mud pie over there and letting out a scream." And that's enough.
And that's one of the things I think that separates. I definitely, one of the big divides, I think, between my experience of state teaching and my experience of forest school teaching, and I don't think I did it at the start of my forest school journey, but I definitely do now, is just verbalizing and being okay with sharing that I have a need, and that is okay in the setting of a group, because and sometimes Gemma and I do this thing where we will what's the word? I guess I would call it like it's genuine empathy, but then you fake that it's your feeling. So you can see that little Johnny over there needs to go for a run, but instead of saying, "Johnny, I think you need to go for a run," what you do is you clap your hands very loudly and you go, "Do you know what, guys? I need to go for a run right now because I'm feeling really anxious." And you just start running. And it's easier that than needling in and going, "Oh, you over there, you look like you're feeling this."
Definitely. And I think that whole thing about mirroring is so important.
That's the word, mirroring.
It's really important in this. And particularly kids who've been through extreme trauma, if you can try and mirror it, show that you are empathizing and it's not the words, suddenly something happens. It's back to this electromagnetic sort of resonance that's happening. So if you look at Amy Banks, for example, sorry, I'm quoting a load of people, but Amy Banks is, I think, another must read for most people. She wrote Wired to Connect, and she's got these four neural pathways that we need to sort of embrace and try and encourage. And it's summarized by the acronym CARE. There is a calm sort of neural pathway, which is the engagement of the vagal nerve, this main nerve that goes all the way through our body. If we can engage that, what kicks in with that is the parasympathetic, which is the calming nervous system. Okay, just by often our calming way of being. That's it. And then you need acceptance. We need to just accept what's coming from them. And if they can feel accepted for what they're doing, if they can feel accepted for picking up a load of mud and chucking it and screaming, and that's okay, as a very small example, good. And then we need to resonate and empathize, and that's when the mirror neurons, if you like, kick in. And that's the mirror neurons is where our empathy, and it feeds on itself. And we've got mirror neurons in various parts of our brain. Our empathic system can kick in. And then there's the energetic, which is the sort of motivational pathway, which is about getting to what is our passion and how can we support that passion and encouragement. So if you can, I'm just summarizing this, paraphrasing, if we can engage in all those neural pathways, and this is all, this science, this is neuroscience, this is all the rest of it, but she's put it together in such a lovely way in terms of the way we connect as humans. And what helps with all of that, if you think about the calm thing, the natural world, being out in the woods, we know about the calming properties that has on people. And I'll never forget one little lad, and it's often quoted back at me because it's on a YouTube somewhere, about a little lad I was working with who was from a single parent family, and he just latched onto me and he took me over to his tree, and it was his bee tree. And that was that. And the reason it was his bee tree is because the tree didn't judge him. He was only 4, but that was more or less what he was saying in our little dialogue that we'd had together. So it was that acceptance thing. And the resonate thing is this, again, this electromagnetic thing that happens between us and particularly plants. We now know this property that plants and particularly trees has in terms of the phytochemicals that are put out and the science between that and all that Judi Dench stuff. Those that saw that Judi Dench series, where Judi took, it's basically the research from Peter Volber and the Hidden Life of Trees and all those people in Canada that have done all the research into this. And plus the mycelium and what they're doing. So that's the resonating bit. And then the energetic bit is you just feel, well, I just know ever since I was young, going back to my mum, where we started off from, I just felt energized when I was out in the woods. And it's just, and that's probably why I've ended up where I am, because there was just so much to do in the woods and so many places to go. And I just love working with wood as well. So that's the sort of energetic thing, that motivational thing. The natural world does it, but we just need to do the same, I think.
I find
it doesn't need a lot of work.
When I get into the woods, I feel very energetic. 6 hours later with 15 kids, I am less energetic.
Oh, get that. I'm absolutely knackered at the end of the day. Totally. Yeah. And have to sleep, but it's a good knackered.
That's when you then become calm and relaxed.
It's when I reflect and we do whatever.
Find out about CPD courses at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
It's occurred to me as we were just talking now that I think it's probably pertinent for people listening. I guess we're rambling around things that people might need to think about when we go back. And it's occurred to me that one of the things that we talked about in an earlier podcast is probably very relevant now is, I think I'm right in saying it was in The Whole Brain Child. And they talk about finishing the narrative all the way through. And so the example in the story, in the book, Gemma, you'll remember, is it The Whole Brain Child?
Yes, I think it is. And are you talking about the child who was in a car accident with his
do you want to, because I can just about remember it, but do you?
He was in a bad car accident with his childminder, which involved her. She was driving and she was taken away in an ambulance and wasn't very well and was looked after in hospital and did get better. But after that traumatic experience, I forget how old he was, but not very old, he was stuck in that place of trauma. He was just reliving the accident and very, very upset for a long time. And the way that he was helped was to be encouraged to tell the story of what happened. And instead of stopping at and then she was really hurt and there was blood and she was taken away in the ambulance, to continue the rest of the story, which was, and then a few days later we went to visit her in hospital and she had stopped bleeding and the doctors were looking after her, and now she's come home, hasn't she? And she's home and we spoke to her on the phone and she was okay, she was at home, and next week you're going to see her at her house and she's okay now. And that our brain often gets stuck at that most trauma.
So it's when you have the feeling again, isn't it? And your brain brings up the horrible bit of the memory. You're almost signposted to the positive outcome. I sometimes do it with my own son, but we do it preemptively now. So he is just learning to use the pedals on a bike. So he is quite worried about it whenever we put the pedals on, and he gets a bit kind of like, oh, I might fall off. And I've started going, okay, and what will happen if you fall off? Well, it will hurt my legs. Okay, and what will happen when you hurt your legs? You'll have to pick me up. And will that make it better? Yeah, I think that'll make it better. And so he can talk through this point to where he's going, well, actually, it's okay. And I think putting that on a grander scale, I think we will see a lot of children who are stuck in that, and we weren't allowed outside. And we will have to encourage them through and to go, do you remember when we were allowed to exercise more? And then do you remember when we could see each other more? And do you remember last week when they said we could
and bring it to the present? And now we are outside together, and okay, we're going to have to be careful about the way we interact, but we will get through. I think this with this pandemic is to say we will get through this. We have to keep telling them we will come through this. Look at the deaths are declining and all the rest of it, and okay, we've still got to look after ourselves so it doesn't go up again, but we will come through it. I think we have to give that hope and positive message all the time.
Yeah.
And do you think we will be in a because I would say forest school leaders that are situated in schools are quite often the I don't want to say that it sounds very grandiose, but if I say we're quite often feel like we're the emotional mouthpiece for the student body, in that we can go back to teaching maybe more I don't want to insult teachers, more people focus more on academics.
Just insult the system.
Yes. Those that might be more focused on academics, that forest school leaders are the ones that can go back and go, there is a lot of feeling of X in the group at the moment. There's a lot of feeling of Y. And do you think that we will have to be particularly understanding about challenging behavior that's coming out when we go back, and that we will almost need to stand up for the children and going, they're going to need time to adjust?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think in many ways this could be forest school's golden moment.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, absolutely. It is fingers crossed. But again, without hope, well, we're stuffed, aren't we? I've always had that sort of glass half full thing. And I think, I don't know, I have a feeling that teachers will recognise that getting outside and doing something like forest school that is a therapeutic space, and doing it this regularly, and it's got to be regular, because even though it's only been a few months that we've been inside, it doesn't take much for this trauma to get in. It's quite a significant thing. It is. Well, we've always said society's been saying this is one of the most significant things that's happened since the war. Well, it is the most significant thing that's happened. So it is going to take time to work through. And it just, for me, it shone a light on that old phrase, it takes 7 generations for a trauma to work through. Which is, you see that in a lot of traditional cultures. It's going to take us 7 generations to work through this. And we forget, and I think our leaders forget at their peril, that this is really significant and it's going to take time to work through this. And because the forest school's set up perfectly for it, because we are about this long-term regular thing, particularly when it comes to rebuilding those emotional attachments to both. I'm sure many of them, it's probably, it's only going to be the privileged white middle class probably who've got access to gardens or local green spaces that have utilised that during this. So it's going to take time to rebuild all that and get it going. So I think we, as forest school leaders and the forest school movement, Forest School Association, have really got a thing from the rooftops about how important this is to support other teachers, as you said, to help kids work through this. Because if we don't, we all know, and this is where I guess that system's wrong, we know if that emotional brain, that limbic system is not working properly, we're not going to get up here to achieve these damn outcomes that we've all got to achieve.
And it's probably worth making the case now that when we're talking about challenging behaviour and behaviour being different when we go back, that we're not exclusively talking here, because I think at least for me, the go-to when I hear that phrase is my experience of having chairs thrown at me or my displays ripped off the wall. But equally, it can present as low engagement or in things like that. And so that we're not just going, who's making the most noise, because I'll look at them. it's anyone making a different
Absolutely,
level of noise,
and it is
than
that
they used to.
anxiety that's often manifested it in this. Oh, I'm going to shut down. Just that freeze, a faint type reaction, and them knowing that actually we've gone into this sympathetic mode to look after our body, and the only way we're going to do that is by engaging the vagal nervous system,
Throwing mud at each
other, all of that. The stuff that we've talked about. I still think we've got a long way to go in teacher training, and I'm not getting at teachers, but in terms, you've probably had it with forest school training. We used to get in its heyday, Worcester University used to send us about 8 or 9 students to do the forest school training, and they'd always say, I don't know why we don't get this brain body stuff at college. And we ended up actually working with particularly primary science personally at Worcester University, and it's quite a well-known teacher training institution. And just because, I don't know, they just felt we had a bit more of a handle on the whole neurobiology stuff. Teachers don't get that, and we have to sort of show them that actually that we really need to work with teacher training institutions on all of this, the importance of it in the longer term. And you just hope that this might jolt them into something. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, that'll be really interesting, won't it? Because there are several kind of factors in this whole going back to school thing, which means that the focus from academic outcomes is going to have to change, partly because all children are back, of all ages, so you can't kind of rely upon that kind of benchmark and measurement of teachers and the system in terms of, well, what percentage of students have you made reach this pre-agreed outcome? Well, you can't look at them anymore because half of them aren't here, through either parental choice or space in the school or whatever. So that's in the bin now. So what are you going to replace that with? And there is so much now about it's going to be about play and relationship building and that kind of so it'll be really interesting to see which way that goes. But then you also see all these like really terrifying pictures of desks with tape on the ground, all of that kind of measured out space, and then you think, oh, okay, well, that doesn't really encourage the kind of playful
and that kind of links to what we talked about in last week's podcast when we were talking to I think it was Michael James was saying that when children with additional needs, when everything they go and do is a therapy or an intervention, then the message being reinforced
that you're broken.
is that you are broken and that anything you enjoy. And equally, I think there are probably ways, and this is probably something that all of us who are practitioners should be considering, is how do we, because we're good at it anyway, in putting in subconscious cues. You lay logs on the floor in a line so that you don't have to say that's a fence and you don't go over it. You just make little cues. And I think what a lot of schools are doing is I feel like we're in danger of going overboard on I'm using air quotes here to say the safety theatre. The tape all has to be yellow and black, and the signage has to be everywhere and visible, because the fear of this thing is in some ways worse than getting it. So I think when we're thinking about how do we make our forest school sessions safe, we should be thinking, how much of this can I put into the background so that the children don't have to worry about it? Sometimes Gemma and I talk about mental load, and that you can, that it's not something you can necessarily take off someone. If you can't take it away, but if you can set up your environment or set up the way that you're going to run something so that you're not putting onto the children a constant and you have to think about looking after yourself, and you have to think about this, and you just want to be able to go, I want you to get, because not all of that is going to be a barrier to flow and a barrier to
we have got, it's called semiotics, all that, by the way. So, yeah.
Oh, okay. That would have saved me some time.
So the semiotics of the way the government has dealt with the pandemic is completely wrong. It is just yellow and black that they have used, for example, that's called it. I mean, it's the messages that are put into our environment that we subliminally receive. So, and the semiotics is that there's a whole field of psychology around that.
And you tie that into behaviour that we're already expecting to be challenging, and you are heaping shit on top
and
of
they
shit,
should know about this,
really?
because the greatest fear is the fear of fear itself.
Yeah. Have you seen there's so a part of the government guidance about reopening schools, as I was wading through it, and then yet another one was released at, Sunday night of a bank holiday weekend. You're like, okay, this is a great time, for early years settings. The latest guidance was updated, and a week, literally 7 days before they're supposed to open. It's like, okay, great. And then there was a little sentence in there about this particular organisation has designed us some posters which are really great and should be displayed around the settings, and we recommend that they are suitable for early years up to teenagers. So I clicked on that, and the first and only one I looked at has the words horrible hands in huge. And basically says your hands are filthy and disgusing and you should be afraid of them. And then it has it's covered in really tiny writing with lots.
Do they know nothing about positive language or
horrible hands? And I was like, oh my god.
I'm going to show you the thing, John.
Yeah, I used quite a lot of swear words, didn't I, Lewis? It's not coming.
I'm not going to swear.
This
is a podcast.
Have you heard us? We swear constantly. Right, you go for it, mate.
Let myself go then.
Fill your fucking boots.
There's no way we're displaying that. I mean, it's just the most.
That's appalling. I don't know who's advising the government. Did you see that when they shifted away from, say, the NHS to the new slogans? There's a really good podcast from a really well-known psychologist who works with marketeers saying they've got this all wrong. And that just seems to have permeated, and obviously has done, and permeated through to this. That's terrible. But surely they know that fear is the greatest fear of all, and you just traumatize people. That's what if you.
But that's okay. That's why Forest School exists. We're gonna be the just before we all get done for treason. I think that is a good place. Is there anything else, John, that you think people who might be going back and might be worried about and kind of have in their head this idea of grief and trauma that you think, I just want to make sure they know about that?
I think the main thing is how we've already touched on this, but for me the main thing is how do we model this and how do we deal with it ourselves, because we are the greatest influence. Children know far more from how you are and what you do than what you say. Much more, and it is the way we present ourselves and embrace them, but at the same time being quite firm in our backbone in terms of actually this is what we're going to do to keep ourselves safe, because we are in a pandemic and we will get through it if we do this, but we can all sort of loosen up a little bit. And I think that's probably my biggest message would be just you need to just look into yourselves and how you deal with this, and knowing that you've got to embrace this thing because it's hit us. And I think we are going to get more pandemics in the future. I've just been listening, there's a new book coming out recently about the number of pandemics that have happened over the last 30
Jesus,
years.
John, let's not end it there.
But what I'm talking about is it's building a new relationship with it, and that we will get through it. We'll get through these. We've got through pandemics in the past. We have had in our society, if we look at it, in the last 100 years, we've had more pandemics than society has had in the past. Sometimes they've been quite big pandemics in the past, but they still have happened. Ebola, SARS, bird flu, all of that, and we've got through them, right? But I think we will get through them even more. Well, this is an opportunity to get through this one really positively if we can embrace it a little bit more and look into ourselves and have that element of hope, which is what Forest School has got, and to say, look, we will get through this. It is an issue, and I have problems with this, but we're going to work with this, and it'll be fine. and we are going to be as open as we can, but we're not going to scare you shitless. That's the point. We're not going to be scared shitless, even though we have been scared shitless by the all the messages that are zeitgeist is that's out there, which is quite understandable. But I just don't think I think the government's colluded with this virus myself, rather than actually doing something about it. I was speaking to somebody from South Korea, because we went over and did some forest school stuff years ago there. When they want to get something done, South Korea does it. It's called Bali Bali. So this is, we'll finish with Bali Bali. So they sort of heard about, and they've got a forest culture over there. 70% of the woodland of the country is forested still, even though they've got this big, great thing in the middle called Seoul. I'm sure it's called Seoul for a reason. And it was just fascinating watching how forest kindergartens have grown, and formally from none. Within 5 years, 80% of their forest kindergartens were going outside, and much, much more, right? And the same has happened with this pandemic. And it's partly, and I was talking to Yuan, she's one of the key people in the forest kindergarten movement over there, and we're just emailing each other about how you're getting on with the pandemic. And she said, "Oh, we're all right. We've embraced it, and everybody's taken the right precautions, and I think we're through it," which they did. They have. Of all the countries, developed countries, it's South Korea that's got through this. And it was just that word, "we've embraced it," that really hit me home. And it was a bit like the San Bushmen in the Kalahari. They have embraced TB and are learning to live with it. And it's not going away for them. Whereas because South Korea have embraced it and they've really gone for it, they're coming through it. And I think it's the same with us. We need to just embrace it and build a different relationship with it and say, it's okay, we're going to get through this, and not scare the shit out of everybody.
There you go, that's the end. Well, thank you for talking to us.
Is that okay?
You've made me feel better about it, even if no one else.
Definitely.
Well,
I feel like that was very timing to do this podcast. I feel like there'll be a lot of people listening who are thinking about how to reopen and what that's going to look like, and feeling the fear, for whatever.
But we need to acknowledge the fear, but don't feed the fear. I just think, you can feel it, but don't try not to feed it. It's just...
Go hug a tree.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. See ya.
Bye.
If you like this podcast and want to support more episodes, you can donate through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Children of the Forest to show your support for the Forest School podcast.